Welcome to the Journey Home. This is Open Line First Monday. This is the episode of all those during the month that you have the biggest part to play in our program. Of course, every week, at least the last half hour, your phone calls and emails are a very important part of the program. But tonight we try and give you even more space to bring up some of those questions maybe have been on your mind the last couple of months. My guest tonight is not a theologian or an apologist, but he's Shawn Dougherty. He's the Associate Professor of Dramatics at Franciscan University. He's a friend. You're more of a farmer than I am. I'm just pretending to be a farmer, and you come from farmer stock, right?
Yeah, we do. We grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, and when we came to Steubenville, we found our farmette as quick as we could, and we live on it.
Your farmette, yeah, that's right. So he's going to reflect on a little bit of culture tonight. He teaches dramatics and other aspects of art at Franciscan University. Right. So he's also going to talk a little bit later about a writers' festival they'll be having at Franciscan. It's part of the reason I wanted him here and getting prepared for that, but also talk about the place of Catholic culture, right, and our need to examine it in relation to our faith. But remember, your phone calls are an important part of this program. So if you have any questions for Shawn, give us a call at 1-800-221-9460, or you can send us an email at journeyhome@EWTN.com. Well, Shawn, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Delight to be here.
We used to get together.
Yes.
We live a couple hours apart now, but we've gotten together and talked farming a little bit. I've
right.
got so much to learn, and wish we had more time to get together, so we had to come all the way to Alabama just so we could see each other across this table. But let's jump right into it. Give the audience a little bit of your background, your spiritual background, if you would.
Well, I've been a Catholic all of my life, and I love the church. I think a big part of being a Catholic for me was my mom and dad. They were devout Catholics. They loved the church. And in my experience of growing in my Catholicism, very often it's in hindsight that I experience Jesus and I experience the Lord. There aren't as many times when Jesus comes to the forefront, but there are those moments, and those moments of birth. I've got 6 children, and at each of those moments when that baby comes out alive and is healthy, you know Jesus has been watching over you, and you really feel that. But I had an experience at the University of Dallas. I went to the University of Dallas, and we have a Rome program. And I was in one of those churches, and I don't even remember which one it was, where they have the actual thorns that were in Jesus, and they have those actual relics. And it was so touching to me. It made Jesus so alive for me at that moment. And I thought, oh, if I could only touch those things. And then it dawned on me at the Eucharist. I consume him every day. And it was a wonderful experience.
You know, it's sad when I think back on my Protestant training that it almost used to be a bragging point. Certain professors would say, that isn't it good that God didn't leave us anything physical of Jesus so that we might get attached to it. Yeah. And I mean, that's just an ignorance of history and the reality of what God did give us. Yes. Not only, in some sense, relics of all kinds of proof going all the way back, but the Eucharist.
But did he give us his flesh?
Continuing yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Every day, and to think that every hour of every day, every minute, somewhere, that is happening, that miracle is happening.
In fact, that shares that mystery of Catholic understanding of the faith that isn't purely mental, it's physical.
That's right.
The fullness of our experience of the faith.
Right.
All the senses are the ways that the Holy Spirit can touch us. When you look back on your journey, I mean, you're a lifelong Catholic, probably parallel to many of our viewers who are either lifelong Catholics or lifelong Lutherans or lifelong Presbyterians. When you look back, we also know of many folk that went through the same hoops and then are not in the faith anymore. And again, with hindsight, what was it? Why'd you stick with it all those years?
Well, I think so much of it was the example of my parents. They gave me such a wonderful example. They never doubted the faith. And even going through Vatican II, in some of the changes that happened, they were hard for them. My mom was a convert, and as she saw things that she was told, these are important parts of the faith, and then those things somehow being lost or slipping away or something.
Or belittled.
Yes. That was hard for her. But she never openly said of the church it's wrong. She never said that priest is not a good priest. She didn't say things like that. Perhaps Mom and Dad did it together alone, but they didn't do it in front of us. Yeah. And that gave us bedrock. I'm one of 6 boys, and all of us have stayed in the church.
Really?
Yes, one of them is studying to be a deacon right now. And yeah, it's a wonderful, and I think that that's part of it. And then I went to the University of Dallas, and at the University of Dallas I started going to daily Mass, and what the University of Dallas focused on was truth, and the struggle to know truth. And if you're really in pursuit of truth, it all ends up in Rome.
If it's true, then it's of God.
It is. That's right.
That's right. So you can look at any curriculum, in a sense, and look for the truth. Especially if you have a teacher that wants to lift up the truth. I mean, that's a key. Well, in this journey, spiritual journey, of course, it led you. Did you always want to be in theater and dramatics? Was that one of your lifelong callings, or?
I loved theater from a very early age. I enjoyed doing it. My dad wanted me to go into law school. And so I played with that for a little while, and then I didn't do very well in that. And so I went back to theater. And the thing that I think I love about theater is what I believe is the artistic call, that the artist is the prophet. He is to perceive truth in the world around him, and then he is to explore that truth. He is to demonstrate that truth. He is to tell stories that manifest that truth. And to me, art is right up there next to being a priest. That if the priest in liturgy, I remember Adrian Hall at Dallas Theater Center saying, he was not Catholic at all, and he said, people should be going to the theater for the same reason they go to church. They should be going to have their souls fed. And that's really true. And art should be doing that, is feeding souls. So I try and tell my students, do work that feeds souls, that explores truth, that is prophetic, that gets at what is the real problem in society and expose it.
I hesitate to... You and I talked a little bit about, I just finished my novel,
yes,
by God's grace, How Firm a Foundation's finally done. Hopefully it might be out there in a bookstore nearest you.
Yes, right.
But the way you just described that, described why I wanted to do that book. Because when you try and write a novel, when you write nonfiction, you're dealing with facts, you're trying to move people, but there's something about the dramatics of a novel. Yeah. In my mind, you're touching not just head, but you're trying to grab the heart.
Yes.
And so the way I describe what I'm trying to do in a novel is, my goal is to help someone's heart turn towards home. Yes. To do what I can, which is what you said, feed the soul. Yeah. Now, given our culture, what can you say to our audience about culture? I mean, here we are in a culture when, let's face it, how much of our culture is also trying to grab our heart?
The thing that to me, and it's again something that I stress to my students, is the importance of choices. When they open a script, they've got to start making choices about what they're going to do. What is the lighting going to look like? What's the costume going to look like? What are all those kinds of things? And I think we have to do the same thing in our own lives. We have to look at our life and start saying, what are the choices that I'm making? And start saying, what is truthful about these choices? And one of the things that's very unfortunate about where we are right now is that there has been a break. The culture that got passed from age to age to age, somehow it has slipped away. So I and my wife find myself trying to recreate, to refine that culture, to grab hold of something. And so we have to start examining all of our choices, and we find that many of our choices have been affected by the secular culture as opposed to by the culture of the Catholic Church.
In fact, let me read this scripture from Colossians 2 and have you reflect on that, because it really parallels what you've just said. But kind of reflect on this as a teacher of dramatics and Catholic art. This is from Colossians chapter 2, and Paul is writing, "As therefore you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so live in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving." That's kind of the one side. The other side, "See to it that no one makes a prey of you by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the universe, and not according to Christ."
Yeah. I think that what that says is embrace the world around us. One of the shows I'm getting ready to do is Chekhov. There's nothing overtly Catholic about it, and in fact, it's a very dark play. But it is so truthful, and it is a play about a girl who makes a bad choice. But through watching that story, truth, the students who I hope come to see it will see something about their own lives, about making choices about their own lives. And they will want to not follow that path. But
would you say that would you say that will come naturally out of, let's say, the natural law within them, that will come normally from them, or are we going back to the need for the formation that needs to be there, so that when they see a play like Chekhov, they can interpret it correctly?
Right. And I think that that's right. And I think that at the University of Dallas, where I studied, and at Franciscan University, we should not be afraid to look at the existential movement. There's some truth there. And we have to look at it and we have to say, now, where did they go wrong? And then we have a newer understanding of how we are to follow the way things are. When my wife and I first got married, we were so many Catholics. We go through natural family planning. We say, okay, we're not going to have any kids for a little while. And the best thing that happened to us is we had a child 9 months later. and it was the beginning. And again, that's Jesus, I think, stepping in and taking over where I might have made a mistake. And then you have another choice. You have a choice about how are you going to school these kids? What are you going to do with them? And we look at our options and we say, well, let's try homeschooling. Let's see how something like that works. Because some of the dangers of the secular world are kind of so great that maybe we need to make another choice. But it's reflecting. It's reflecting on what you learned. It's reflecting on the philosophy courses that I had at the university. And again, it's looking at a thing and saying, what's truthful here? What's it about?
Do you find it hard at the university when you're dealing with your students, with those students that come from backgrounds where their consciences weren't formed very well, where they weren't given the data to be able to make the right choices, to be able to see something, almost to the point where, because we know their foundation isn't good, that I don't know if I want them to see it or not? Or do you trust their natural? Or, I'm getting at? How do you deal with that with students that come to you unprepared?
Most of our students come
prepared at Franciscan. Okay, well then that's good. Maybe that's
But the students who come with questions, and we do have some that come with questions, I think that the logic, the truthfulness of the thing, and I think you continue to ask them questions. If they're challenging this, say, well, what should it be? Well, and to try and turn the question back on them, I guess.
The problem is when we live in this culture, as that scripture said, where we're surrounded by people that was sold out, not to good philosophy, but the human philosophies, the traditions really are man-centered, self-centered, money-centered, greed-centered. That's American culture all over. Is, what can we do to help families trying to break free of that? I know you and your family, in seeing this, have made some pretty radical choices.
Yeah, we have made some radical choices. I would encourage people to. The first thing I would do is throw the television out the window
after the show.
Yeah, that's right.
Except for EWTN.
That's right. I'm a theater person, and I say that. Get rid of that TV. That TV doesn't bring enough good that we perceive to overcome some of the bad things. And the thing the thing that's wonderful is what you substitute for it. You know, people say, how can you live without a TV? and you know what we do? We read as a family. The kids love it when I'm the reader. And right now we're reading Tolkien, and so they love for that. My wife reads to the kids all the time. And I think that would be, you know, if people even cut back and said, during family time, 7 to 9, we're not going to have TV. We're going to read during that time.
Well, essentially what you're talking there is the discipline of fasting.
Yeah.
Because when we fast, we are training our self-control with not necessarily setting aside a bad thing, but we're controlling things so that when we have to say no to the bad things, we're strengthened. So, but it also helps us appreciate. For example, with television, we recognize in one hand that yes, the technology of television is a gift of God.
Right.
It's amoral.
Yes.
But it's how it's used.
Right.
And we're just so predominantly in a culture that's wrong. So by using the discipline that, I mean, I know lots of people.
And I would say that about TV.
Yeah.
I would say that right now what we're seeing on TV is not outweighing, the good is not outweighing the bad. Yeah. I'm not saying that TV is, in and of itself, as you suggested, is amoral. It's neither good nor bad. And if there was a way to turn it around, and I would love to see my students go out and start to turn that world around. But it's not there yet. And perhaps the way that we deal with it right now is to pull back from it. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that we find about it is not interactive. As a family, it's all glued on that TV, as opposed to the interacting of reading. Yeah. When a child can stop and say, "What does that mean, Mommy?"
And you've also gone into farming. I mean,
yes, we have.
You know, you have your dramatics, but then you're also, or your family's out on the
summer we spend a lot farming, and I think of myself as a perpetual scout leader. I've got 5 boys, and our last is a girl, and so I'm not sure what I'm going to do with her. But we do a lot of projects. We're in the middle of a addition to the house that all the boys are working on. Instead of asking builders to come in and do it, we as a group come in and we work on it together. And I try very hard to make, a part of what the farming is about is the boys have chores. The boys have responsibilities. The boys have things that depend on them. The animals have to be fed. And we try, and even down to the 3-year-old has a job that has to be done.
You know, when I think of all these things in making our choices, and because they can be radical, difficult choices, that wonderful philosophical challenge to know thyself calls us to, this is what your family does.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's best for my family. I'm not talking relativism here.
Right.
We're talking about trying to understand our family and its gifts.
I think so much of it is the goals. Yeah. What is the goal of the family? What's the model that you're going to say, I want my family to be like this? And I think, you know, is it going to be that our family is going to be productive-centered, we're going to be a machine, and we're all going to bring in as much money as we can and then spend it? Or, and I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and I've been kind of looking at the model of the monastic world, of a contemplative world, where one of the things that you and I were talking about is we've gotten goats and we're milking goats, and I was really concerned about, you know, what's that going to do to the family? We're not going to be able to do anything, and actually I found that it gives an order to the family, that at this time and at this time we have to milk, and that order, and then we go to daily mass, and so we milk, and then we mass, and then we do our chores, and then we eat together, and it's actually starting to give a form to the world that I think we all feel very comfortable in. And then the boys long for the time when they're a little bit free, and we give that time to them, and then they work on their projects. And I think it's a really good thing that we're stumbling upon.
You know, when you think about this issue of Catholic culture and trying to redeem our time for the good of God, that if you look back in history and we look at how certain implements were added into culture because they were time savers.
Yeah.
You know, originally they were added so that a person might have more time to do those things that were good for the family. But what has happened, every time we added a new thing, we either find more time to work,
Right.
you know, in a sense, to go out and make more money, or go out and play more golf and all that. And so
We're actually going backwards a little bit. Now, my children might say that Dad always does it the hard way. But, you know, when it came to getting hay, instead of going out and buying baled hay and making it easy, we cut the hay, then we raked the hay, and then we brought the hay in. And it became a joy. I really am serious. The kids enjoyed it. They liked going out there and getting it. It was hot and sweaty, but it was a fun job.
well, there's that old song from World War I, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris?
Yeah, that's right. So we're not going to let them see Paris.
Yeah, so, but it's hard, the point is, it's hard to go back.
It is.
It is hard.
That's
I mean,
right.
you're really fighting, and I know it myself. We have a cow that we milk, and I know that it's a struggle, you know, and we are certainly not a model of farming. But I do know that it is amazing on how so much of our life, influenced by the culture that we live, as we're talking about, has focuses on accomplishing so much, getting so much done. We have X amount of time, so that when we're doing a task, at least I find that I'm almost more focused on getting that task done so I can do something else, rather than appreciating the very task for itself.
Right.
Which, you know, you and I both talked about, we found in the milking and the other chores of farming.
Right. Right.
You know, not just getting
I
it done.
think the other thing too is that with kids, too often in our culture now, the kids are something to keep time. You know, you've got to take them to a soccer game. You got to take them to a baseball. You're just trying to keep them entertained. And our kids are really productive. I mean, they are part of what's helping us bring in the food. Yeah. Now, we're not dependent on the farm, and we don't want to try and be dependent on the farm. That's too hard.
It's almost possible today. I mean, sadly.
But the fact that they're out helping to weed, and they're helping strain the milk, and they're helping do these things, they feel like I'm an important part of this family. I'm not just something to be entertained, but I'm essential.
Clean out that cow barn, right? You know, that's good stuff to share. You know?
That's right.
Let's take our first caller. Hello, Barbara from Maine. What's your question for us?
My question is that a long time ago, really, I took a year course in Shakespeare.
Oh, wonderful.
And my professor, Professor Rand, said that after years of teaching Shakespeare and doing research and so forth, he was convinced that Shakespeare was a Catholic. And my professor was not Catholic.
Yes.
And I wondered what Mr. Dougherty thought of Shakespeare and what Dr. Rand said.
I think that's a wonderful question, and in fact, Crisis Magazine, this issue addresses exactly that question, and there's a lot of discussion about it, and in fact, one of my students just did her bachelor's thesis on that topic, and I'm very convinced that if he was not Catholic, he was very influenced by Catholicism. I directed what's the play? Measure for Measure, in which we have a nun who is so completely Catholic, and his understanding of Catholicism is very, very clear. There's no doubt in my mind.
Which is amazing at the time that he wrote.
Yeah, that's right. It was a dangerous thing to do. And in fact, Crisis Magazine talks about the fact that he puts a priest on stage who is a sympathetic priest, and if that priest were a real priest in the audience, he would have been executed.
You had to be recusant at that time.
Yeah, that's right.
And hiding out.
That's right.
Of course, you know, the theories about it really was the Duke of...
Yes, that's right.
You know, that it really wasn't Shakespeare that wrote it, but that there was a Catholic that wrote it and all that. I mean, that's...
There's another person in there who says it doesn't really matter whether he's Catholic or not. In one sense, I would say the same thing, because I'm very interested in the truthfulness, again, of the plays, not whether he was Catholic or not. But if it's truthful, it's going to be Catholic. It's going to reflect Catholicism.
All truth is of God. Let's take our next email. Brian from New York. How do you think we have or have not responded to the Pope's challenge when he told Hollywood, quote, "The ball is in your quote," unquote? Quote, are we reaping the results of what's on television today?
Oh, you know, it's so nice for me to say I have no idea what's happening in Hollywood or on TV very much, other than what I hear through the newspaper, and I would say that we're absolutely reaping what.
You know, I remember when Michael Medved was at Franciscan University, and he talked about, why Hollywood does what Hollywood does. Why it does, however it's supposed to be said. Yeah. But most people think because it's after money. And he was more saying, no, that they felt that they were in this culture that they had to live up to. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So in other words, rather than clean up the language, well, that would be jeopardizing my artistic integrity.
Right, right.
So in other words, they've sold out to their peer groups.
Right.
And that's who they're trying to please as opposed to the Creator.
Right. Well, and their understanding of what truth means, is a totally different understanding than what we mean by truth as a reflection of God. And again, as I said, that doesn't mean that we have Jesus in every line, but it does mean that at the end of the story, we have learned something about what it means to be a Catholic or a Christian.
And actually a good example of that would be the books of Flannery O'Connor, because
that's right.
I mean, she doesn't talk about Jesus.
No, and those are some dark characters.
But
that's right.
They're redemptive.
Yes.
When you listen to the stories, she is pointing in a direction.
And they're not all. I did a play called The Visit of the Old Woman, and in that it is a dark play, and it ends in utter darkness because all the characters have sold out. And that was one of the criticisms that I heard, is there's no hope here. And I said, yes, and if we travel on the road of these characters, there is no hope. And it's critical that we tell that story as well, that we can destroy ourselves.
Like in Graham Greene's book, The Heart of the Matter, the whole book is about how the main character, a very innocent, faithful character, lies.
Yes.
And now the whole book is what happens as a result of a lie.
That's right. That's right.
It just leads and leads and leads. So in the end, there's no redemptive aspect at the end, but the idea is this is what happens. Right. So don't go there. So again, it's an issue of truth. This fall, we have this writers' conference.
Yes.
Talk about how, again, your convictions about culture and your work in drama.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is very important is that Catholic artists come together. We talk together, we talk about what we can do that's truthful, and how do we get our craftsmanship built up. Too often, something is labeled Christian or Catholic, and it's not very good craftsmanship. And we've got to be able to do both. And so this Writers' Festival is bringing together at least 40 wonderful writers who are going to talk about their craftsmanship. And one of the questions will be, what does it mean to be a Catholic writer? Does it mean that you're Catholic and you write? Or does it mean that you explore what truth is in your, it's a good story told well. That's what we're
And there's no easy answer to that question, right? I mean, it's a bit debated. And even if you asked who we might think of over the last 100 years that were the great Catholic writers,
that's right,
you would have different opinions on what it means to that. Would you say that maybe that's part of the reason that there's such a dearth of Catholic novelists today? Because we're not sure what it is?
And because it's not getting passed on. That's right. And so people, and again, but I think a lot of it is that break in the culture.
Yeah.
That we need to help that transition across. And that's what we need to do, is we need to get these writers together, we need to get these artists together and reform it, and recreate it.
It's sad to say, it's really a marketing issue too, because for a Catholic writer to be able to get his or her art in the public, there's got to be a publisher who wants to risk all the money behind the publishing, so we need an audience and a market.
That's part of what the Writing Festival is about, is it's those beginning writers, because we're going to have a number of publishers there who are going to talk about specifically that. How do you write? How do you put a format together? How do you do those kinds of things?
Well, very good. I think during the break there'll be some information if anyone in the audience is interested about the Writing Festival. And we'll be back in just a minute with some of your questions for Shawn Dougherty. Welcome back to the Journey Home. My guest is Shawn Dougherty, Associate Professor of Dramatics, Franciscan University, and a personal friend. We've been going back and forth a little bit on the issue of culture, and it's the struggles of living a faithful Catholic life in the midst of a culture. And there's that tension between what you might call the Jansenist position, which is kind of a rejecting of everything, or the sold out position, which is kind of whatever comes, okay? And it's finding that place in the middle. Any advice on helping? How would you define, you know, what are the criteria you use to define what is a good Catholic culture?
Well, for anything, you know, it's looking at, is it good, true, and beautiful? And if we look at that, and I think of that frequently in terms of liturgy, could we take the space of the liturgical space and make it more beautiful? And can we take the home and make it more beautiful? And can we take the farm and the yard and the barn and think about those things in terms of the good, the true, and the beautiful? How do they participate in that? Are they functional? Do they do what they're supposed to do? Could we make it more attractive? And I don't mean attractive in a pretty sense, but attractive in a balanced sense, in harmony with each other.
All right, very good. We have a caller from Michigan, Father Krill. What's your question for us tonight?
Hey, Marcus. Great to see you on the tube here, and we love you in Grand Rapids.
Well, that's a great place. Thank you very much.
I'm just finishing your novel, and I'm trying to find extra copies so I give it to all my good Protestant friends.
Oh, well, thank you for the endorsement. Appreciate that.
Hey, it's wonderful to see Shawn there, too. And I really have a comment, though the screener told me to ask you a question at the end, so I'll come up with one if I can think of it. The comment is this. You know, what I'm connecting in my mind here is the Holy Father's passionate adherence to truth in this relativistic culture that we're in, and his obsession with connecting freedom to truth, and his preoccupation with truth itself, since it's so maligned and really not even believed in the general culture.
Right.
And I wanted to remind the audience, and I'm sure neither of you need this reminding, but the audience may remember that the Pope himself grew up as an actor.
Yes, right.
And his first doctoral dissertation, you know, produced that abstruse volume called The Acting Person, which I must be the only person in Michigan who reads it as spiritual uplifting. But one of the lines that he has in The Acting Person is that I'm a person, a human person, is never more themselves than when they're acting. And on the surface of things, that sounds like a contradiction, but in fact, what the Holy Father is getting at is that the greatest form of maturity that we can come to is what he calls over and over again in his books, the quality of self-possession. And it's the deliberateness that Shawn was talking about, that in drama, actors play a role and they display a certain truth.
Yes.
And they are fully themselves when they fully exhibit their role, and they don't go outside their role trying to be all things to all people.
Yes.
And that's why acting is so much like the priesthood, because it's a role that I give myself over to, and in the giving of myself over to that role, I actually discover who I am in that.
Absolutely. It's one of the things that I talk about so much with my students is that the art of the theater is about self-revelation, and it's the thing that my wife looks at it and says, I would never want to do that. But it is all about exposing yourself. It is about finding the Hamlet that is in you and releasing him. Because if the playwright has written something that is valid, that is worth exploring, it has universal qualities. So the angst that Hamlet feels is my angst. And it's so true. I'm working with a seagull, Chekhov's The Seagull right now. And I want so desperately for the students to be able to identify with the problems of these characters. And they are problems that they know, but will they come to it? Will they allow themselves to expose themselves and let us see their vulnerability in the work? And it's only then that the truth will really be revealed.
You know, you said something earlier when we were kind of run over some ideas, and that's what my sons have been in local theater a lot in Zanesville, and I finally got roped into it with them. We're doing Fiddler on the Roof, and I got roped into being Perchek, which is the Russian student. And I was thinking of this, that you can memorize the words.
That's right.
And you can get up in front and you can recite the words perfectly. and never know the character.
That's right. And if you don't identify, and to me, and we talk about this, and it's a little bit complicated, but we talk about the objective and what the character needs, but I have to be able to identify with what the character needs, and then with what motivates them. And then if I do that, and if I start to feel what they feel, the whole center of the part of the Stanislavski system is empathy. Can I empathize with the character? And it's wonderful that a priest would say that too, because in a sense he becomes Christ in the Mass. And when he says those prayers of the liturgy, what we need to see is him praying those prayers to God. And through watching him really pray those prayers to God, I know what it is to pray, because he's modeling for me what it is to pray.
When the Greeks came to Philip in the Bible, they said, we would see Jesus.
Yes.
They were asking to see Jesus. That's the words what we ask of our priests.
That's right.
We would see Jesus.
That's right.
We are to see Jesus. And, you know, even we in our worship, again, we can just say the words every Sunday.
That's right. That's right. I can say Our Father and I can rattle it off, or I can take those words inside of me. And sometimes they do go inside of me. But if the priest will take the time, every time that he says the Mass, to really be my spiritual leader going to God for the community, then I will understand more of what it means.
You know, we're going to take this email, but this sounds a little bit like acting. Let me read what it says in Colossians 3.
Okay.
Begins by saying, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, and lists all the stuff which is rampant today, which we are to do. But then it says, put on then.
Yes.
As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassion, kindness, lowliness, meekness, patience, forbearing one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving. Put on then.
Yes.
This is who we are to be.
That's right.
And it's almost like, I may not feel this way, but we are to be this.
Well, I tell my students in acting, you have to art at 8 o'clock. You know, you have to start arting at 8 o'clock. You don't have a choice. And you have to have that kind of control. And I think that we have the same thing with our virtues. We have to start putting those virtues on. We have to explore those virtues.
All right. Let's do this email quickly.
Okay.
John, I think it'd be Newald from Oklahoma, your home state.
Wonderful.
There you go.
Good.
You must know him, right? Do you know him?
No, I don't think so.
Do either of you know of any resources available to find the moral content of movies and theaters on video, so I would want to avoid? Resources that would give people guidance.
I know that there's something out there, and probably on a Vatican website or something, that will classify the movies according to violence, you know, sexual content.
Well, the bishops have something, don't they?
Yes, I'm sure they do.
So a bishop's website, probably. I think the Catholic website of the bishops has something like that. So that's a good place to go. Let's take our next caller, Howard from Delaware. What's your question for us?
Professor Dougherty, noting that you do not seem to know what is really on TV, yet you're teaching students to write and to be in drama. How can you expect them to affect this giant media, which is so important in our culture?
I think that the tools of the theater are very similar to the tools of television. So as an actor, they would bring what we teach them in the class, but the most important thing is that when they look at a text, and this is what we spend a lot of time on, we're saying, where's the truth of this text? How do you find the truth of this text? How can I enhance the truth of this text? A fellow professor at the university talked about what happens in a play as being tangible theology. It's a story that tells us how we should live, or what my relationship with God would be. And very often that story is not a true story, what's happening on TV. And I don't think that I need to necessarily watch all the things that are happening on TV today in order to know how to affect this media. And the better thing would be, how do you get along, how do you make connections with those kinds of people, and I can't really teach teach that anyways. And
well, that isn't your expertise area.
Yeah,
your dramatic arts is I mean, it's certainly a part of television, of course. Yeah. But we're talking about a whole different medium when we're looking at television, the techniques of that.
They're very similar, but yeah, there are some differences.
But there are different aspects of that. What about any other resources, though? Not necessarily the question earlier about picking movies.
Yeah.
But any books or things you might recommend that you have found helpful in helping people appreciate Catholic culture, how to reclaim Catholic culture in their own lives? Any place you would send them that would give them some ideas?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, one is the Catechism, of course.
Of course, the Catechism. You know, what I would say is start looking at beautiful art. Go back to good art books. Go to museums that are celebrating good art. There's a lot of wonderful art out there. There's a lot of great movies. You and I just talked about the American Classics station. Yeah. I've badmouth TV, and maybe I shouldn't do that so much. There are some very good things that happen on TV, and you know, those classic movies, the really good theater. I think that's where a lot of our culture could. We can pull things from there. But what I would like to do with things like the Writers' Festival, and with I would like to get a Catholic theater group connected, is we need to be encouraging playwrights who are writing plays now that are significant, that tell true stories. So I think I think we have to recreate some of those things.
Yeah. All right. Let's take our email. This comes from Joseph from Staten Island, New York. Dear Marcus and guests, in your opinion, who are some of the great Catholic American writers? Thank you.
Current writers, well, Flannery O'Connor, we've said, although she's dead.
In fact, let's put a strong plug in for Flannery, because the reason I say that is I've got to admit that when I began reading Flannery O'Connor, it took me a third of the way through her entire collection before I was kind of getting her point.
Right.
And it took the last third before I realized she's one of the greatest Catholic writers ever lived. But at first, she's rough.
Yes, that's right.
She's not easy. I mean, she's a Southern writer that has this kind of dark side, but she's great.
One of the favorites of my wife and myself is Rumer Godden, who very late in her, she was Anglican most of her life, we think, and late she converted to Catholicism, and her work is very beautiful and very truthful.
Yeah.
Her Kitchen Madonna is a wonderful book to start with. Very beautiful.
I'd like to recommend an author that's been featured on, Raymond has featured a number of times, Ron Hansen.
He'll be coming to the festival.
He'll be at the festival. Two books that are fascinating Catholic fiction are Marietta and Ecstasy and Atticus, which is really a kind of a modern telling of the prodigal son, which are, you know, again, these are art, you know, literature. I mean, they're bordering on literature. They're not, I mean, they're not overtly Catholic, but they are a good story well told, and that's, again, it's truthful, and that's what we should be about in our work. That's right. Okay. Let's try this next email.
Okay.
This is from Tom Kimmenaw in Orlando. My friend is absolutely sure that we are saved by faith alone. I don't know much about any of this, but he says Catholics are saved by works, although I think this may not be right. Is my friend wrong? And if so, what do I say?
I think that there is that wonderful, you and I talked about the mystery of it, and they go hand in hand. They are, you must have both. I'm not a theologian, but I think that the faith leads us in our work. And you know, again, the steps that my wife and I have made, steps in faith, have led us deeper and deeper into our work, have led us deeper into our faith, and all of that leads us deeper into truth. And you know, the truth, the more you live the truth, the more the truth is revealed to you. And so I think that's happening in our lives. Yeah. We believe it is.
Yeah. You know, a way that I've tried to understand this mystery between faith and works is, you know, a son to a father may give all kinds of lip service on how much he trusts his father and how much he loves his father and how much he respects his father. But if he just stays in that chair and never gets up and shows any obedience to the father, then what's the use of his words?
That's right.
On the other hand, you could have the other extreme of a person, of a son that does all this stuff but in his heart, he's not doing it.
Does not love the Father.
He doesn't love the Father. He's not doing it out of love. He's doing it either I'm trying to win my dad's approval, or I'm trying to, influence him so he can give me $5 to go out and buy whatever.
Right.
Then that's not right either.
Right.
There's the mystery of the both and.
Yeah.
Of it's our love and our trust in God, and they're showing it in the way we live. They hand in glove. They go together.
And they do go. They go together in a way that they kind of follow, like a domino in a certain sense. The faith makes you want to do more work, and the good work leads you to the faith.
All right, now we'll take this email, but this might be pushing beyond your theology.
All right.
But you're dramatic, so you can act it out great.
Okay,
you can act like
I'll give it my best.
This is from Mary Margaret Comu. I'm sorry that I don't pronounce it very well, from Lafayette, Louisiana. When non-Catholics read the early church fathers, what do they make of the references to the Eucharist? So many have said they read their way into the church through these writings. I am sure many non-Catholic ministers have read them. How do they explain away the obvious?
How do they get out of...
In other words, when, let's say, non-Catholics read all that wonderful stuff in the early church fathers, and they run into these comments on the Eucharist.
I remember a Protestant at one time when I was in high school asking me, do you really believe that that's the body and blood of Christ? And I said yes. I said I do believe that that's really the body and blood of Christ, but I didn't have the backup. I didn't have all those kinds of things. But it made me start thinking, why do I believe that? And it's the Gospel of St. John, to me, more than even the Fathers, that makes it so. It's the most beautiful passage to me in the Bible, when he says it's real food and it's real drink, and you have to eat my body. And they knew at the time that that's what he was saying, because they walked away from him. And they said, you can't mean this. This is too horrific. So it was clear to them from the beginning that he was talking about real body and blood. And the next passage, he says to Peter, he says, or to the apostle, are you going to walk away too? And Peter says, where else are we going to go? And so often I have felt that way. When the church has been, when it's hard to be Catholic, when it's hard to be Christian, when I've thought, is this the way? I think, where else are you going to go? Where else are you going to go?
Well, because it's an issue of truth.
Oh, and
it's an issue of truth.
And ultimately, I have been very blessed that the church and Jesus and the Bible have been very, I don't know if snug is the right word, but it has been such a warm feeling, I'm in love with the church.
Yeah. The beauty of God's constant supernatural intervention in our life, which most of the world says, it's a coincidence.
Right.
But it's those little supernatural interventions that are there, that often in the telling, God help me find my book today or something, we know that was God working.
Right.
That in my mind is just his little touch.
That's right.
Just
to
remind us that he's there.
We were on the roof and the rain was coming. And we got the last piece of that plywood in, and that's when the thunder hit. And one can say, oh, it's a coincidence. But I think God, and the other thing was, God was reminding me, I'm in control here. Yeah. And I just wanted you to know that I held off that rain for just a little while.
But you see, we kind of laugh about it, but that is an important part of Catholic culture.
It is
recognizing that God does that.
That's right.
That's the aha. And I have often said that is proof of conversion.
Yes.
Because when something like that happened, if the first thing we say is, boy, wasn't I good?
Yes. Oh, that's true. That's true. Boy, wasn't that fortunate that I did that.
Oh, man. But when we see God,
that's right.
That's proof of his conversion.
And my road as a Catholic, as a lifelong Catholic, does not have the dramatic turns. I'm not a revert. I'm not a Protestant convert. I'm a lifelong Catholic. I've always loved the church. And it does not have necessarily those huge dramatic moments. But in hindsight, when I look back, and I remember talking to my mom, and I had wondered, in becoming a Catholic, and in becoming married, I thought, now what's going to keep me from being a statistic? How am I going to stay together? And not 2 months after I was married, I turned to my mom and I said, I don't have that fear anymore. And this was the wisdom of my parents. She said, that's the grace of the sacrament at work. And so I look back in hindsight and I say, Jesus, you were there. And it was so wonderful. But it's not a big hit me, but it's...
But you see that is the way God works. And
I believe
if we're looking for the big ones all the time, we won't hear the still small voice or the still small tap.
That's right.
And to me, that is the work of His grace in our lives. And that's our encouragement to the audience, is to
absolutely. To look for those.
Yes. And that's why when I think about Catholic fiction, you see, there's the real difficulty is if we're going to do fiction or stories or drama that really come from a Catholic worldview, then this is a part of a real Catholic worldview.
That's right.
But how do you do it that isn't cheesy? I mean, how do you do that?
Again,
the vertical and the horizontal.
Right. And I'm not the greatest writer, and I'm not, I'm hosting this writing festival, but I'm not necessarily a writer. But it is about listening for good stories. And the story always starts with a moment. The moment that this was a moment that changed my life. And so then you back up from that and you tell us all the stuff that led up to that moment, but we're going to that. That's the moment. And all the backup that led to this moment is all of the, as you're suggesting, all of the steps that had to be there to get us to that moment. But they all seem coincidental, as opposed to that they were all planned. It was all... The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder is about these people who all die on this bridge, and one would say, oh, it's a happenstance. But then he reflects back on it, and that each of those people died at exactly the right moment in their life.
Yeah. Well, that's God giving us space for faith.
That's right.
As opposed to just saying, no, this was me, and here's the... a lot of us would like that clear answer to prayer coming down on a stone tablet, but usually it's a soft
and it hasn't been my experience.
Well, how about maybe a final word or two of encouragement to the audience, of parents that are trying to educate their children, encourage their children in the midst of this culture?
Well, I really believe that the Christian message or the Christian approach is a radical choice. And we have to believe that. We have to say it's a radical choice. And that may mean that we start making radical decisions, a little step at a time, but that we start saying, wait a minute, why am I doing these things? Maybe these things aren't the best thing. The kid going to baseball practice every day is, there may be a good thing in that. On the other hand, maybe that's starting to divide up the family a little bit. Maybe we ought to be rethinking these things and look at all the choices. One of the things that's wonderful about Steubenville is we have so many people with so many children, and when we get together, which is frequent, when we get together, we are all talking about that. I would encourage families to come together and talk about, how do you raise your kids? What do you do? What do you do with this problem? And know that the problems that you're facing are the problems that we're all facing. But that the answers are out there. And not that there's a stamp that this is the way that everybody should do it, but start looking and looking at the choices that you're making.
And I'm thinking a place to begin, which is not an easy place to begin, but is examining in what ways our own marriages and our families are shaped by the culture around us or by the message of the church.
That's right.
We can examine there. So if we're going to try and work as a family to try and establish a culture that reflects Christ in our home, we need to look at our structure and how we treat.
Being open to life?
Being open to life, and the big challenge of looking at those verses that too often today people want to jump over, Ephesians 5, the relationship between the husband and the wife. That really models the church, Christ in the church. You see a structure, and that's to be the family. And are we letting culture define our marriages?
That's right.
Or the church?
That's right. I am so lucky to have the wife that I have, who is so happy to be
Would you like
home.
To say hello to anyone?
Hello, Beth. I assume she's out there. And she is a wonderful wife, a wonderful mother. This is radical. We have homemade bread all the time. She fixes our meals. We eat our meals as a family. It's a beautiful thing.
All right, Shawn. And I know that to be true because I know your family very well. Shawn, thank you for joining us on the journey.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for your witness and also for your work at Franciscan. I know you're challenging young people to make a difference in this world.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us on the journey home. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. God bless, and we'll see you again next week. you.